Okay? Thank you. Structural changes that could be important for low and medium income countries to sort of boost their growth. Now we are into kind of political science field, but it's a part of the picture. If I mention politics, equity policy, giving people the chance to get education and to get a reasonable income, to be able to take part in production in one way or another. That is a problem in many countries, that there are a very, very skewed distribution of wealth, which may actually be a very strong obstacle to growth. So that's what is meant there. So equity policy is important, and it's the same with the last point there. To get something done with poverty is an important factor for growth. Risks. If a country gets a 10% rise in oil prices, it might reduce the GDP to 1%. So when we have the fluctuations in oil prices, and still, even if the world economy has not sort of totally recovered, the oil price is still on a quite high level. And that has a big impact for countries in the developing part of the world, like Africa and so on. Talked about interest rates. We have also talked about these aspects. But again, just repeat that to be able to say something about or to get information about elasticities on output from an increase in oil prices or a change in other risk factors may be important for planning. So energy prices is a main risk for global, for many countries in the world. Some are quite robust, like for instance Norway, which is both a producer of oil and a consumer of goods. It doesn't matter that much, right? But countries who are heavy importers of oil to produce, they will be severely affected by changes in oil prices. And again, it impacts on transport demand. This is just to show you a map of what I've talked about. This is just a map showing the distribution of wealth in the economy. Where the dark bluish areas here are quite prosperous countries, and then down to parts of the world where there are less prosperousness among the population. But this will probably change over the coming decades. Do you know what is going on in Africa now, at the moment, as we speak? It has to do with globalization. It has to do with foreign direct investments, and it has to do with natural resources, minerals, oil, and so on.
Chinese is coming.
China is very active in Africa at this moment. And They see them, of course, as a supplier of raw material. In the longer future, also as a trade partner, they can buy products from China. In the short run, supply raw materials. In the longer run, buy products. So that is a very long-run strategic thinking. And they are also active in Latin America for the same reason. So I think that is quite interesting. Whereas the British, the French, and the Danes, and also way back some Norwegians were going out to other countries, and they extracted the natural resources from there. Now it's in the new era. Perhaps the Chinese are the most active on that side, but it is in a different way than it used to be. And it remains to be seen whether that kind of activity is creating some kind of balance between the countries in Africa, Latin America versus China. But again, to get information about what will be the outcome of such activity in the longer run will be important also for strategic transport planners. This is just to show you how it has developed, the oil prices over the years, where we see a quite strong growth in oil prices from during a very short time span, quite recently, from 2007 and up, and then it falls again when we had this economic downturn, which is beneficial to some countries. On the other hand, the same countries will also suffer from a decrease in demand because of the bad times in the global economy. Yeah, I think I will leave this. The lecture notes will be posted after the lecture, so you can read that for yourself. It summarizes a bit of what I've said already, more or less. A few numbers on world trade. China again is a big player. Raw materials and investment goods, particularly strong. With investment goods, I mean supplies to serve investments in production facilities, for instance. Developing countries are growing stronger, as I said. China has a large trade surplus with the United States. And that is because China is exporting more to the US than the US exports to China. There is some export to China as well, but the balance is skewed. And China, on the other hand, has a deficit with other developing countries. Pardon? Takk. Okay. This is not perfect, I would say. It's good that you are keeping an eye on me because, okay, now I'm back again. But China is buying raw material from other countries in the region, so they pay for imports and they don't export much back to the other developing countries in close to China. That's why we have this pattern. So import of raw materials, exports of finished products from China, which affects transport flows. And you see here also China over the years to 2005 has a very strong change in market share of exports over the years. So they are, whereas the developing countries, or the developed countries, the advanced economies, their share is slightly decreasing. So there is a different division of labor in the global sense that takes place, and this is continuing. My guess is that China's expansion will it will eventually turn level off, whereas other developing countries, this black line, will start to grow. We are talking about Africa and Latin America as perhaps the two most important continents where such growth will take place. The big traders. I'm not going to go through all this in detail, but you just see who the main players are on the international trade arena, where China, again, we have talked about growth. Remember that? We have talked much about growth, not so much about absolute numbers. And in absolute numbers, United States and Germany are still the major players. But China is catching up. Japan has always been big, at least since the World War II. Lots of big players in Europe still, but this will, I think, some countries in this bar will become more important as players on this arena in the future, as we have talked about. Here we see an illustration of trade flows in terms of shipping lines, and we see there is a very big activity between Japan, China, and North America, and also towards Europe. It's quite some volumes that are coming from China goes also via North America and then on to Europe. So, but you see the main flows goes east-west, not so much north-south. Quite some agricultural products are going north-south, but the main commodity flows goes east-west in the world. This illustration is interesting, and it contains, if you break it down on say specific products, it may give you very useful information as input for planning. This shows value along the vertical axis and the matrix from Africa, Middle East, Latin America, North America, Asia, Europe, to Europe, Asia, and so on. So the big bars here are internal trade in Europe, internal trade in Asia, and internal trade in North America. But then we can see, for instance, trade going from Europe and to Africa, is this bar. From North America and to Asia, it's still quite a lot. From Asia and to North America is this bar. So the directional balance is somewhere contrary at that time to what we could expect, what we might expect. We could expect that the bar showing flows from Asia to North America would have been higher than the contrary. But that was not the case at that time, which was in 2004. A lot of things have happened since then, but I have not managed to find a new version of this matrix. But it says something about flows and the value of the flows between regions in this case. And the same information could then be available for specific countries. This is just a summary of world trade. Manufactured goods are dominating world trade flows. There are exceptions, like oil and gas exporting countries. The Quad, as I said about there, they are importing and exporting similar products from each other. Kind of intra-industry trade. They trade cars for cars, for instance. Counts for about 2/3 of the international trade. Whereas North-South are they are inter-industry. We export mechanical products and so on, and we import agricultural products. And that knowledge may, when you consider it in detail, may have an impact on how you plan and how you set up capacity again. I mean, if you manage to have some kind of balance in the shipment of cars to utilize your capacity efficiently, might be easier or will be easier in an intra-industry trade between two countries trading the same products. Whereas if you are going to trade with agriculture and other kinds of products, that gives quite different demands with respect to capacity. So this heterolean trade means dissimilar goods between dissimilar nations, and I will comment upon that later, but it goes with which countries has comparative advantages in production. So there is a distance in production structure and products between countries that are engaged in a trade like this. Come back to that. Just a very short description of factors behind freight transport demand. We'll come back to this later on in the course. But there are different drivers, and they are listed on the left-hand side here. The economy means business cycles, as we have talked a lot about. Linked to the GDP, it's partly a function of the structure of the economy in terms of resources, goods, and services. Industry location and changes in location will have an effect, of course, of transport production and demand, ton kilometers, and the choice of transport modes. Because the choice of transport modes depends on the nature of the product that is going to be transported, of course. Industry location, it is linked to spatial structure, which is it's more or less aspects of the same. Containerization and intermodal transportation is also part of this picture. International agreements, we will have a separate lecture on terms of international agreements. But of course, it has large impacts on the demand for transport services. It goes with, for instance, the way custom is laid out, custom procedures. I mean, that is one of the main ideas behind the trade associations like the European Union, to reduce trade barriers and by reducing trade barriers, you reduce friction among players, among customers and suppliers, and hence you reduce resistance against trade flows. Just-in-time practices and warehousing is important. It may affect the sizes of shipment. It may also affect localization, because just-in-time may affect the distance between the supplier and the customer. Many manufacturers of cars, they demand their suppliers to be located next door, for instance. Smaller shipments, shorter distances. Instead of having long lines of supply where you have a car part producer located on the other side of the globe, with the risks that may cause. Strategic alliances, that has to do with one basic economic mechanism, namely, or two. One is to gain market dominance. That you can work together with another transport company, for instance, and you can gain a large market share, and you can gain power to set prices. That's one. The other one is that you can, by joining forces with other companies, you can be able to share parts of the fixed costs. Let's say if you share the costs of warehousing, you may share administrative costs of handling transports and everything. So you sort of share the fixed costs. That may be one consequence of strategic alliances. You may also be able to fill the vehicles in a better way to increase the payload of the vehicles by coordinating transport flows in a better way. Packaging and recycling. To the way you are able to design packaging, design containers, also the demand for recycling and things like that will also have an impact. Regulatory issues. If you are opening your transport system for foreign distributors, foreign carriers, you increase perhaps competition, and you may lower the transport costs. There has been a tendency towards deregulation of transport activities. The last thing that happened there was that airlines are now allowed to do cabotage within a country. Means that if you are a foreign airline and you land on Oslo main airport, you are allowed to take people and cargo on from Oslo to Trondheim or to Molde. That is cabotage. That was banned up to a few years ago. Taxes. You have probably seen the discussion on fuel taxes and the differences in fuel taxes between countries that affects the competitive situation for the freighters, for the transport companies. Foreign road freighters may benefit from lower fuel taxes in for instance, Sweden or Denmark or other countries, or the UK for that sake. They may bring the fuel with them, and do freight operations in, for instance, Norway, which has high fuel taxes. Infrastructure. We talked a bit about road capacity and congestion. Affects risk during transportation. It affects variance in transportation times and reliability. And technology. Containerization has had a large impact on the way we do transportation today, along with other aspects as are mentioned there. But containerization is the big change that took place in the 1960s and onwards, which means that you can have unified load carriers which works on ships, railways, road transport, and so on. Information systems, track and trace systems, which is a quite new phenomenon in transportation, which increases efficiency. It increases the ability to plan for the, let's say, the customers of products. They can trace when they can expect to get the products in-house, and that may affect the way they do their logistics. This is we'll come back to all these issues, but this is more just to show you the service spectrum of freight transportation, where you choose carrier on the basis of what products you are going to transport, and also the preferences of your customers. Because the way you transport a given, let's say, a given consumer good may affect your relationship with your customer. What I mean by that is that you can charge differently for different delivery time. You can specify, if you have bought a computer from somewhere, you can pay more and you get it faster. So it's a degree of freedom for the producer or the transport company to differentiate the level of service according to customer needs. You see, air cargo is quite expensive. This is numbers from 2007, $3 per kilo, whereas taking the same amount kilo on water transport is very, very cheap, 1 cent. And then you have all the possibilities in between here. But you see the big leap in costs is from air cargo and to all the others. But still, air freight is a very important part of international transportation, as I will come back to in more detail. It's a matter of distance, it's a matter of weight, and it's a matter of customers' preferences. And it's a matter of risk. You may have backup plans for critical items, which you might want to let go by truck from A to B. But if something happens, you may use air freight as a backup, which in many cases may be very, very expensive, and you will probably like to avoid that as a backup solution, or I mean, as to do that in practice if something happens to the truck service. So risk will also be dealt with later on. Now, on to the last topic, and now we are going to be a bit more specific on things. I'm going to talk a bit about the basic theory of international trade. because it says something about something important, I think, about how we can understand why trade takes place. So I'll talk about concepts, producer and consumer surplus. We'll talk about domestic markets and what happens when you open for trade. I'll talk about the welfare effects of trade. We can discuss a bit on those issues, and also a bit on transport costs in this theoretical framework. What role does it play here? So the motivation is to learn about the mechanisms that cause trade to take place. The first question is, why do countries trade? Why do they trade? What can the reason be for why countries or businesses in two different countries engage in trade? What could the reason be for that at the outset? Trade as a phenomenon.
It's cheaper.
Yeah. You may, and when you say cheaper, what is actually the interpretation of that here? Why is it cheaper? You may think in terms of what we talked about earlier, wage costs. Some countries have what we might call competitive advantage. They have low labor costs, they may have access to a lot of foreign investment capital and so on. So they may actually, you observe when you sit as a customer in Norway that you can buy cheap electronics from China. Whereas the Norwegian producers of the same electronic equipment, it's much more expensive for them to produce because of labor costs and so on. So to merge these two parties together, the cheap providers of products and the consumers that are willing to pay for those products, and they want more products when they have to pay less. So it's a gain for the consumers in Norway that they can get cheap products from another place instead of having to pay, let's say, the double price for domestically produced products. And it's also a gain for the producers in, let's say, China, because the willingness to pay for the products here in Norway is quite high. It's higher than the willingness to pay for the products from the, let's say, the domestic consumers in China. So they get a higher price if they export it to countries like Norway. So that's the simple story. The second is to say something about how does trade affect production and consumption in each country. What will happen to consumption in China if we start to import some kind of product from there, where the rich Norwegian consumers are willing to pay a higher price?
Well, we will get all the products, and in China they will have less of it since they don't get anyone else selling it to us.
Yeah, there will be kind of a transfer of wealth in a way, not necessarily between countries, but between groups in each country. Because the producers in Norway will also suffer because they don't get their product sold. Consumers in China will suffer because they have to pay a higher price, and many of them can't. We'll see that later on. And the Norwegian consumers are better off because they get cheaper products. Chinese producers are better off because they get better paid. So that's a short story on how it works. And then it's a matter, how does trade affect the well-being in each of these two trading partners? We're going to look into that as well. And also then, as I said, there are some issues on who gains and who loses within each country. So this is the point of departure, where you have one, and you have that in the literature, which is the chapter 2 from Lindert and Pugel, a book in international trade. So this is the point of departure, where you have a market, consumers market. D stands for demand. You have quantity, and you have price in US dollars per unit. And you might say that this is a story about a famous American motorcycle brand called Harley-Davidson, expensive cycles. And then you have also the supply profile for the same for the producer of these bikes on this side. This is a supply curve. So if the price then is $2,000 per unit, you get an equilibrium. You demand 40 bikes, and 40 bikes are produced. In this domestic economy, you don't have no trade. The supply curve is shaped like that. For a price of 2,000, you have what we call as consumer surplus, equal to this triangle. And the whole, let's say, the value of this product is equal to what the market is willing to pay. That is a common assumption in economics. So if you sell 40,000 bikes at the price of $2,000, then the value of this product in the market is equal to T plus U, which is basically the price times quantity that the producers are willing to pay, 40,000 times 2,000. And the remaining surplus for the consumers, which means it's the utility that they have, which exceeds the price that they pay, is 3,006 minus 2,000 times 40 divided by 2. So C is equal to 3,600 minus 2,000 divided by 2, because it's a triangle, times 40. So we can calculate all the values here. T plus U, which is what you pay for the 40,000 motorbikes per year. So C plus T plus U is the total value of this production. And on this side, W plus V plus E is the area above the supply curve, which is the profit or the producer surplus for this production. Producer surplus, that is the profits that are left when the costs of production is paid, is equal to 2000 minus 400 divided by 2 again, times 40. And the costs of producing the same amount is the area below this supply curve. So we can calculate C plus W plus V plus E. C plus W plus V plus E is equal to the social surplus, which is equal to the producer surplus plus consumer surplus. And that can be calculated by just doing the calculations there. And when we talk about the gains from trade, we have this as a point of departure. Because what we are actually concerned with is the social surplus, the change. So when we introduce trade, what will happen to the sum of consumer and producer surplus? That is what we are talking about when we talk about the gains from trade. Here. So I have, so this slide here is just showing what I have told you already. So I will not spend more time on this one. The dotted lines are amounts that can be calculated. So when we merge the supply side and the demand side, we get this equilibrium. 40,000 bikes sold at the price of $2,000, where C is still the consumer surplus in this case. So the economic welfare in terms of surplus is equal to the, as I said, the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. And here, those two are combined into C and the H. C is the consumer surplus and H is the producer surplus. And this is the departure, the domestic American market for bikes. So in the next and the final section, hello again. We will talk about what happens when we introduce trade in this scheme. So then we break again for 15 minutes.
Ja, das ist